Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Learning and Families Committee. We'll do apologies and substitutes from Andy in a minute, but welcome to everybody here as normal. A couple of substitutions, so welcome. And also a welcome to Harvey, who's our new modern apprentice, I think, so he's going to take it all in. And thanks for bringing Harvey and Caroline. It's much appreciated. Andy, substitutes and apologies, please.
So we've apologies from Councillor Shires with Councillor Anderson substituting for her, and apologies from the Provost with Councillor Colin Stewart substituting for him.
Thanks very much, Andy. The variety of minutes there in 31323, 334, are we okay to approve those minutes, or are there any matters arising? A minute or two just to have a wee look there. Yeah, I mean, I am very deliberately casting them together, but if there's any doubt, then just for the records, do we approve the minutes of Learning and Families Committee of 27th of August? Thank you. Do we approve the Executive Subcommittee of 2nd of June? Noted. Thank you. And do we note/approve the minute of meeting of the JNCT in 3.3? Thank you very much. And do we note the minute of the meeting of Children, Young People and Families Partnership of 20th of June? Thank you very much, everyone. On to paper number 4, which is a very substantial funding report with regards to Scottish Attainment Challenge, and I'm going to welcome David McCluskey to introduce the report.
Thank you, Convener. I'm pleased to introduce the Scottish Attainment Challenge Annual Funding Report for 2024-25. It's a requirement for all 3 funding streams encompassed by the Scottish Attainment Challenge: strategic equity funding, care experienced children and young people funding, and pupil equity funding, that an end-of-year report is submitted to the Scottish Government summarising the interventions implemented during the course of the year, along with evidence of their impact and any qualitative and quantitative data relating to the impact of that funding. This report fulfills that requirement, combining the 3 funding streams and providing an update on the progress made in Perth and Kinross during 2024-25. The report evidenced steady progress over time in closing the poverty-related attainment gap in some measures, with particular progress in school leaver data. However, there are still significant differences in outcomes between those from our most and least deprived communities, and between children and young people with care experience and their peers. The report also details the breadth of the Scottish Attainment Challenge funded approaches which have been implemented, tracked and monitored to improve outcomes for children and young people at every stage. Case studies are included within the report to highlight some of the activities that are funded and the specific impacts they have on our children and young people. Before we ask you to approve the report, I am here to obviously answer any questions along with other officers. As a result of annual leave, probably if there's particularly granular questions, we might need to provide written answers to them after committee, but we'll just see the level of detail and depth that we get into.
Thanks very much, David. I think you're being modest about the capabilities of the officers that we'll see. Any questions, please? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener. I have 3 questions. The first is that I know some head teachers have managed to squeeze an amazing amount of impact and benefit out of their PEF allocation of funding, and I do welcome that all schools are now using the Closing the Gap tool so that their impacts are being recorded consistently. I just wondered, how does the school improvement team address schools that don't appear to be making best use of the funds? And related to that, looking at the table in 4.6.1 on page 51, what's being done, what's done about the 14% of interventions which seem to have little or no impact? And are other schools alerted to what these were so they can maybe consider not doing them? Thank you. Sorry, that's actually one question, but all tied up in different bits.
Thank you. So at the heart of that question is probably what we do generically around about quality improvement, round about the piece. So I'll not rehearse that too much. I'll talk specifically about those PEF funded interventions, because the scope of those PEF funded interventions is clearly set out by government policy about the cohorts that they're meant to impact upon and the impact that they're meant to have. So there's real clarity there, which is helpful. I think the other thing that's helpful is another part of this funding package is strategic equity funding, and that's what we spend centrally to improve these outcomes. So a large part of that is spent upon making sure that there's really rigorous quality assurance around about this piece. So there is in fact, there's the whole school quality assurance piece that happens as part of our ongoing quality improvement framework. But there are specific monitoring approaches to schools in terms of how they're spending their funding. Every funding application that comes in gets quality assured as well, and there's conversations go back and forth about the scope of funding and what it's been used for. We have a range now of evidence-backed interventions that we guide people to in the first instance, and it kind of depends upon context whether they fit or not. And then that final bit that you touched upon there, which is about not everything works on every occasion. And there's a whole load of reasons why sometimes interventions don't work. Children are children, and they do change cohort upon cohort, and there's individualities around about context and circumstances. But those that aren't delivering the required input, there's a far greater lens put upon them to try to kind of uncover the factors that really did lay behind that lack of impact. Given that we are actually choosing, if you like, we've got the garden now that we know the flowers that we want to bloom. So the impact, the interventions that we're putting out there to schools and that they're taking up, there's a good evidence base within and beyond PKC that they do work. So we really need to understand when they don't why that is. And I would say, probably in the vast majority of those circumstances, it's down to individual circumstance. It's down to perhaps absence. It's down to a post not being filled in time. It's down to a particular issue around about a cohort. But we learn from that, and that becomes part of the kind of evolution of this as we move on. And I think one of the things I would say finally is, I remember coming to this committee early with a PEF report, and we didn't have anything like the quality assurance or granular detail around that. And, quite rightly, elected members pushed us to that point, and it does feel that we're in a far more cyclical place now in terms of creating that quality improvement.
Councillor Macpherson.
Thank you, Convener. I'm just looking at the data for the attendance rates of looked after children, which shows a declining trend. I just wonder what work is being done to address this. Thank you.
So there is something universal about attendance as well. There's an attendance issue across Scotland, and we do have attendance issues in Perth and Kinross. Across Scotland, the attendance rates haven't really recovered the way we'd expect them to after COVID. There's a whole range of national activity around about that we are part of. There's a whole range of local activity as well that we're undertaking here, and that's about that universal piece. I think the specificities around about those care experienced outcomes are really important though. One thing I would say, but it's by no means an excuse, it's just for context, is that sometimes our numbers in terms of care experienced in general, when we're looking at attainment and performance data can skew that. It can be very spiky, the data, when we look at it. But there's no doubt that your care experience cohort, along with other cohorts, are attending less regularly than the universal cohort. And that's about the activities that are carried out through the Care Experience Children and Young People's Fund, and they're kind of detailed here through the reports. So the work that happens through youth services, the work that happens through like the Grand Mentors, the work that happens through a promise improvement lead in terms of digging into the data for really individual level and working in liaison and partnership with the schools. Also, some of the specific stuff that we have done in terms of particular attendance issues in partnership, and for example with the third sector, the Autism Society, that's been really helpful for certain cohorts as well. So, there's a range of pieces, and I suppose some of them are specifically around about that care experience cohort, but also that cohort are benefiting from some of the other targeted approaches as well as a universal piece. But it's a big item for us in the year to come, attendance, because we are not where we want to be.
Thanks, David. Councillor Barrett, with your second question, please. And I've noted that there's another one to come, so don't feel you have to.
Thank you, Convener. I was looking at the spend on page 56, section 4.8. It's disappointing that the spend to March this year is down to 90% from nearly 94% last year. And I think it was 92-ish the previous year. Do we know how this year is going?
So the spend's on target this year. I couldn't give you a percentage figure. I suppose whenever we're sitting monitoring budgets, there's always that point in the year where you're really, you've got your projections and the projections are always really positive. And then stuff happens that gets in the way of that spend. I've talked, for example, about, sometimes it's tricky to fill posts, sometimes it's tricky going through procurement processes, etc., etc. At the moment, we're on target to fully spend PEF. One of the challenges for us at times is when we're looking at an academic year as opposed to a financial year. So, for example, when we only spent 90% of the funding by the financial year, that was disappointing from a 94% piece, but we were very close to 100%. I think we're about 98.5% spend by the time we got to the end of the academic session. So, that takes us to one of the highest performing local authorities in terms of our spend, in terms of the actual level of spend that we're doing, and it's a quantum leap from where we were, say, 4 or 5 years ago. So it's just about constant close monitoring, and our colleagues in finance really help us with that piece. But at the moment, I'm confident that we'll exceed the 90% marker of last year by the end of the financial year, and I'm confident we'll approach or reach 100% by the end of the academic session.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Duff, please.
Thanks, Convener. On page 57 of the pack, there's a couple of diagrams here which talk about the breakdown of spend and the PEF funded staff costs, which I think amount to about 1.2 million. I don't see anything that tells us how many members of staff that particularly is, but earlier in the report, it does talk about a lack of certainty about the continuity of the funding. I'm not quite sure how serious that might be. I hope not, but I just wondered if you're able to tell us how many posts the PEF actually funds for us and whether there'd be any exposure for the council should that funding not be continued. Thank you.
So unfortunately, Councillor Duff, I don't have the numbers in front of me just now in terms of the actual number of posts, but it's not insignificant. We're spending 1.2 million, as you say, in staff costs. We're spending probably about 3/4 of that in single status staff, and 1/4 of that is teaching posts as well. And there'll be a mixture of fixed term, short term interventions and longer term full-time interventions as well. So yes, when we do spend that amount of money through the totality of SAC, potentially there is that bit of exposure to us as a council, and it's really important that we have a forward view and certainty around about SAC as we move ahead. In that, we're no different from the other 31 local authorities. So the system, I think, is very invested now in SAC and in the future of SAC. Obviously, there's potential political change ahead of us, and none of us know what that landscape will look like. But my feeling and the feeling of I think generally of my colleagues is that Scottish Attainment Challenge is part of the landscape within Scottish education at the moment, and it has delivered improvement and delivered positive outcomes. Well, perhaps not closing completely the poverty-related gap anywhere in Scotland, it certainly made a difference, and I think our report shows that. So my expectation is that this would be funding that would continue in some form or other, but there might be evolution as we move through, and I suppose that's only natural with time as we move ahead, because, as I say, the system itself is very heavily invested in this funding.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett, please.
Thank you, Convener. My last question relates to page 67, where it's great to see the commitment of the senior pupils at Perth Academy and the Grammar who are supporting the after-school learning hubs at Riverside and Letham. And please, could you pass on our thanks to them for doing that? But I just wondered if there were any plans to roll that out to any other primary schools that might benefit. Thanks.
And I think potentially, yes. I think that it's VTO, so the Voluntary Tutor Organisation, I suppose that's about us focusing our resource in a really organised, centrally organised and collated way to capture the most children and young people that we can in that experience. There are a lot of less formal and more school-based interventions like this that go on across Perth and Kinross, and I know that from my visits across schools. We don't necessarily collate those and count those. I think there is an opportunity to kind of take the good learning that we got from this and spread it further. So I think that's something we'd always keep under review within the resource that we've got, and actually within the kind of need that's expressed.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Councillor Barrett. I do think the intervention that you speak of has been pretty successful, and it's to be welcomed. So I appreciate that question, Councillor Barrett. Thank you. Bailey, a hand, please.
Thank you very much. My question's on page 42, and it's the Connecting Families project. And it's quite good reading, and I just wanted to get some clarification. So one of the paragraphs says, though, a small number of referrals due to the limited capacity. And then we look at one person who's gone from attendance of 66% up to 85%. And then in the following paragraph, we've got a young person whose attendance is at 60. And this is a young person with neurodiversity and has been referred to CALMS, but obviously hasn't gone through the CALMS. And we've got the ongoing situation with diagnosis of young people through CALMS, or a lack of diagnosis. But given that number is going to increase, and if you've got a young child that can't get through CALMS, their attendance rate is obviously going to start decreasing, and those numbers of young people are going to be increasing in terms of wanting those to access the Connecting Families project. So if we are going to see an increase in young people that haven't had the diagnosis, if this is a successful project, are we going to be able to support the Connecting Families project to actually see and cover that increase?
Thank you. Just before you do come in, David, I think, thanks for the question, Bailey, and I think you make a really good point here. And I believe genuinely that schools can't do these challenges. They can't support these challenges all alone. The whole family approach is really crucial, is what I'm trying to say. I made a long way of saying that, but the whole family approach is crucial. So I think it's a very pertinent question. David.
So if it's all right, Bailey, and I'll pick up the first part of that, which is really about that neurodevelopmental pathway, and then I'll pass over to my colleague Fiona Mackay, who will talk about the Connecting Families project in particular. I think what I would say about the well publicised discussion that's happened locally around about the ND pathway and assessment as part of that. We've had some recent very positive discussions with colleagues in the NHS and Tayside and with other local authorities. So I'm really hoping that I'll move to a more positive place very quickly in terms of that real multi-agency approach, in terms of meeting the needs of neurodivergent youngsters and indeed their families. But what I would say, I suppose, is that that in terms of the GIRFEC approach, it's really important probably all do our part. I think that Connecting Families is a really good example where we can do that and actually take the expertise of people locally to help us with that. So I'm going to pass over to Fiona, who gives a bit of detail on that.
Thank you. And in respect of Connecting Families, there's some really good positive work that's happening there and a good model. And it's similar to what David was saying earlier about VTO and using the experience of some small projects to actually think about what we can scale up and how we can move things forward. So I'm going to also reference the ASN transformation work that we're undertaking, because I think it's key in this. What we would hope to achieve through some of those projects, particularly the projects that are looking at the school environment, and this year we're focusing on the secondary school environment, which is often one of the barriers that will develop in terms of young people's attendance at school. If we are to be successful in terms of taking forward the work that we are looking at there, alongside the work that we're also undertaking through a separate project looking at the primary to secondary transitions of young people with additional support need, not specifically just neurodiversity, but young people with additional support needs that require that degree of scaffolding to move from one school system to another. We will hopefully reduce the likelihood of young people having low attendance in the first place. And I think that that's our longer term preventative approach that we're looking at to take this forward, because we recognise that to scale up connecting families to deliver on a much greater scale could be quite costly for us as a council, and will meet more of that intrusive approach that we don't want to provide for young people, where we can prevent issues beginning to escalate in the first place through changes in our systems. So I think that that's probably the message I'm taking from it. I think that we recognise the really important work that Connecting Families is doing, and that it will always probably be required around a small number of young people to take that type of approach. But what we would hope to do is to reduce the growth in that number through more preventative approaches that we can take within the system.
Thank you. I mean, I do think as well, in a broader sense, I do think it is worth commenting on the whole long-standing argument about council departments not working in silos. And I think at this point it is appropriate to mention that Aaron Singh and David McCluskey do work really well together on this, and so do Michelle and Steve in their respective roles as well. Councillor Frampton on a corporate parenting and young people's board. That's not the official title, but I do think it is really important that we don't just look at it from the point of view of education and children's services, that actually Aaron's involved in a lot of these conversations as well, and that happens.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is an increasing number, and as the next paper will be a few questions on Aaron's side as well. So yeah, it has to be a coordinated approach across departments if we're going to get it right. You can't, as you said, you can't do it in isolation. We need to work together within the council and work with other partners as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Billy Hearn. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, convener. My question is about looked after children. There's some really good examples of the work being done to increase the attainment gap of our looked after children. Initiatives like the MCR pathways mentoring and the targeted youth work, but they are areas which we need to strengthen. Can you give me some examples of the areas that are in need of improvement and what measures are being put in place to improve?
Thanks, Councillor Massey. Aaron.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. I'm going to defer to Brian Hudson, who's our improvement lead in relation to our looked after children.
Thanks very much. Oh, there we go. I think the bit is that we're looking at our service, and we're looking at how do we build a wee bit more resilience with some of the money that we've got, and that is around employing probably short-term contracts to give us a bit of hand to actually identify our care experience young people and work more in the family and support them and reduce some of the barriers. We're looking at youth workers as well. How do we actually meet the needs of the secondary schools? Looking at our own internal budgets to see how we could identify new ways to spend old money with a target. And so that's the way that we're going with building resilience within the teams.
Thanks, Brian. I know it's coincidence, but I'm absolutely delighted, given the conversation that Billy Hearn and I just had, that it was Brian and Aaron that were involved in the subsequent questions, so that was quite handy. Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you, convener. My question relates to page 4 of the appendix, section 2, closing the poverty related attainment gap. And we're informed that the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation gives us a limited picture of poverty, particularly in rural and semi-rural areas. Are you confident that there's other mechanisms to target resources in the rural and semi-rural areas?
In short, yes. So, you know, there are other factors that we use in terms of looking at deprivation. We have another statistical measure that we use, which is called ACORN. That's based upon individual households, so it's far more granular. The Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation works best in really small type urban postcodes with a lot of homogeneous type housing in the one area. It gives you a better definition. If you think about some of our rural areas, within the one postcode, you might have a very small and a very large house, very different incomes. So we do need that thing that's a bit more nuanced. That's less popular when it comes to the measurement of this funding, because quite rightly, Scottish Government wants to see how we're doing with the funding and that they're getting value for money. So there's not comparability. SIMD gives you national comparability. But for us here in Perth and Kinross, it really only has an impact, a meaningful impact for us in Perth City and indeed in Blairgowrie as our bigger urban centres. So we have to look at the likes of ACORN. There's also, you know, closely looking at factors like, for example, closing grant and seeing the impact that they bring. And then there's that bit as well, which is hard to really articulate in a report, which is about we know our children, we know our young people, and we know our families, you know, and, you know, I delegate the leadership of that to, you know, 70 teachers right across Perth and Kinross to make sure that they're using their felt knowledge, that they're not bound by something statistical when it comes to an intervention. But here where we are, when we talk about SIMD, that's all about national accountability, really, and quite rightly so.
Thanks, Councillor Stewart. Thanks, David. The last question from Councillor Duff, please.
Thank you. On page 28 at paragraph 3.23, it says that all our PEF plans submitted by schools are reviewed and analysed, by the Education Scotland Attainment Advisor, and detailed feedback has been provided. I just wondered if David could say something about the general standard of these PEF plans from schools, and are we generally getting it right, and is the feedback generally positive, or are there lessons to be learned in relation to the completion of these plans? Thank you.
Thanks very much. So our previous Education Scotland Attainment Advisor was actually somebody called Eve Moran, and she was so good at the job we poached her, and she's now a Quality Improvement Manager for us sitting at the back. So to give Eve a bit of breathing space, I'll answer the question, but it's really, Sheena always used to say, it's somebody else's efforts I'm really reporting on here. So yes. So what I would say about that, it is a really rigorous process. The Attainment Advisor from Education Scotland leads on that process, but our Quality Improvement team are part of that as well, because there's that little bit about legacy and learning across the team. I think in terms of lessons learned, it's got better, as you would expect, over I would say probably over the last 4 to 5 years. You know, there's fewer plans coming forward that we're just thinking, no, that's not tenable, or that might be a nice thing to do, but how's that going to close the poverty-related attainment gap, or that's indeed not really, there's no performance or attainment there as well. So often there's discussions about improving health and well-being of children and young people, and that's really important as part of the total attainment picture. But that's the kind of thing that leads to really good, rich, robust conversations about evidence-backed interventions. So what I would say is that, you know, that is still very much part of what we do. And obviously we've got a new Education Scotland Attainment Advisor who's coming to work with us here in Perth and Kinross. And we're meeting her and her boss for the first time tomorrow. That she'll be coming into a landscape whereby plans that come forward that require adjustment will be the exception rather than the rule. And I think probably going back to Councillor Barrett's earlier question, when things do go awry in terms of, you know, the outcomes, we're not in a place now where the plans weren't correct in the first place. It's usually about the execution of those plans, something that's gone wrong in the time that's happened over that time. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Councillor Duff. If there's no more questions, so I'll move the paper, but thank you. Genuinely, I think there's some really pertinent questions in there, and I think part of the challenge going forward will be that a lot of this funding, which was additionality a few years ago, is now almost core funding, and that's a challenge in itself. But it is important to spend it all. It is important to spend it appropriately, and it is important to not to be ashamed of failing quickly when we try something, and if that doesn't work, I think that's okay, as long as we recognise that and move on through it. Anyway, before I get too dangerous, I'll read what I've written down now. But the Scottish Attainment Challenge funding, alongside pupil equity funding and indeed the Care Experienced Young People's funding, has become crucial and it has become important. I think there are brilliant examples in this report of how Perth and Kinross Council are making good use of this funding and helping our young people on their education journey in many different ways, actually. So therefore, I am delighted to move this report, and I will ask Councillor Carr to formally second it, please.
Happy to second it.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. First comments from Councillor Duff and then Councillor Barrett, please, and anybody else that wants to comment. Quite happy to take those now. Councillor Duff, please.
Thanks, Convener. Just briefly, wanted to thank officers for what is a very important report in terms of our education of our children. As Bailey Hearn said, there's obviously going to be an increasing number of children who will be needing support, and so it's vital that we get, you know, the measures that we use correct, and I'm pleased to hear that, you know, things are obviously going from strength to strength in terms of the way we deal with our pupil equity fund, etc. There's, you know, many good examples of the interventions there. A couple have heard about connecting families. I thought was very positive, and it's good to see the range of work and interventions that are being applied, but also the learning hubs, Riverside and Letham primary schools. And I was delighted to see that the senior pupils from the grammar school and from Perth Academy are helping with that, and the results seem to be very, very good in coming out of that. And I think, as already commented, it would be good to see whether these kind of examples could be scaled up and used elsewhere in Perth and Kinross. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Duff. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to officers for the report and to everyone in PKC who's doing their best to improve the outcomes for our children and young people who face the greatest challenges, whether that's poverty, being care experienced, being a young carer, or a combination of factors. I welcome that we do seem to be making progress on closing the attainment gap and indeed the poverty-related attainment gap. But I'm sorry to note that the funding is only guaranteed until next March. And I hope that, given their warm words about supporting the promise and tackling the impacts of poverty, the Scottish Government will commit to continue additional funding for future years and not just a one-off, so that effective long-term strategies can continue to be implemented. And it would be great if the convener and your colleagues in the administration could please continue to press for this within your party. Thank you. I also especially welcome the progress of our care experienced children and young people towards achieving their potential and similar outcomes to their peers. I know some of them also face the additional challenge of being young carers. Councillors recently received an update on PKC's key contact in services for young people, who is based in Scott Street and supporting our champion boards in schools for care experienced children and young people. I would encourage elected members to meet and support your local champs teams if you can. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Barrett. Just before I move on to Councillor Massey, I can reassure Councillor Barrett those conversations are already taking place. I am absolutely satisfied that the current Scottish Government understands the importance of this funding. It will be there for a long time unless the Scottish Parliament elections get in the way of that. So I can reassure her that on that matter. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Convener, and my thanks also to Rona Munro for this excellent report. I think we can all agree that this is one of the most important objectives of this council. In fact, it's our shared responsibility to ensure that every child and young person in Perth and Kinross can live well, free from poverty and inequality. I think this report demonstrates that we are moving steadily towards that goal. The Strategic Equity Fund, Pupil Equity Fund and Care Experienced Children and Young People funding are all driving real change. These investments are improving literacy, boosting numeracy and strengthening health and well-being across our schools. The attainment gap is closing, literacy levels are rising, numeracy attainment for learners in our most deprived areas has increased by 9% since 2020-21. But even more striking is the gap in level 6 qualifications between the most and least deprived has narrowed from 40% to 28% in just 2 years. This is a significant step forward, a sign that the strategies are working. And through partnerships with Skills Development Scotland, UHI Perth and third sector organisations, we're ensuring that more young people leave school with a positive destination, whether that's employment, training or further education. I'm pleased to read that we are pioneering interventions that make a difference, with the Nurture programmes now reaching over 50 schools and music therapy and inclusion practitioners in schools supporting children's well-being and enthusiasm to learn. Initiatives like the MCR Pathways mentoring and the targeted youth work are transforming outcome, improving attendances, building confidence and raising attainment in our care experienced young people, some of our most vulnerable learners. These achievements have not come about by accident. They are evidence of the power of collaboration with schools, families and partners, all working together with a commitment to give every child the best possible start in life. Challenges remain, particularly around secondary school attendance and our care experienced young people, but the progress outlined in this report gives me confidence that the targeted strategies are effective and confidence that by continuing to work together, we will make an even greater difference in the lives of our young children and young people across Perth and Kinross. As I've said, challenges do remain, but I think we must be clear that every percentage point gained, every barrier removed, every opportunity created is just not a statistic, it's a child's future. That is why we must keep going, keep innovating and keep believing that together we can overcome the challenges and make Perth and Kinross a place where every child and young person can live well, free from poverty and inequality. Thank you.
Very well said, Councillor Massey. Can we agree with the report? Thank you very much. We'll move on to paper 5, which is our youth strategy annual update, and I'll invite Aaron to introduce the report, please. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, Convener. I'll just say a few words before I ask Brian to come and formally introduce the report. Committee will remember last October when we first brought the strategy for endorsement. It was the first time we'd actually brought a strategy that had been co-produced with young people, and that was something that was really important to us. As you'll note within the content of the report, views of young people change over time, and it's important that we are reflective in terms of some of those changes. It was really important that we were able to have a framework that guided our practice. We recognised we had a gap of a number of years, and whilst there was excellent work that was being undertaken, it was important to formalise some of those relationships, both from a universal and targeted youth work provision. I can speak about this for a long time, but Brian's kind of real passion, ambition around this area of work, I think will demonstrate that far better. So Brian, if you want to come and speak to the report, that'd be helpful.
Thanks very much. I think that ties in with what the previous report was, that everybody's here to improve the outcomes and make sure your people are the best they can be, you know, and this strategy, like you say, Aaron, was developed alongside young people, took into the voice of young people and produced a framework, and the framework has resulted in this collaborative approach of youth work organisations across Perth and Kinross on how best we support young people. The report was a snapshot for a year. It's our first annual one that we brought back, and hopefully people could see how busy this has been, and this would have been achievable unless not just young people came together, but also partner agencies came together. So our biggest bit is that we now have the first year in, and this has shown the impact of what the collaboration can actually bring together to improve outcomes. We've got some targets for next year. And one of these targets is, and probably everybody would realise this as well, is that how do we turn the narrative around from negative perception of young people in Perth and Kinross to the wealth of activity that they actually do, the investment they put back into Perth and Kinross, the activities they're involved in, and the voice and the change that they've made across Perth and Kinross to certain areas, you know, not just to civic life, to their own lives and to education as well. For us as well is that we have now got a bit of a forum and a bit of a structure where we could invite partner agencies like NHS, police, council officials along, education, different departments in the council to come along and engage and gather that voice. So it's no longer a tokenistic bit where, you know, we could just say we are doing this, we've got the possibility to actually do it. So I'm hoping from today as well is that, yeah, I know that some officials are going along to visit Chelmsford, is that we give the opportunity for officials, departments to go into communities and visit youngsters who will give you their opinion on what's actually happening within their communities.
Thanks, Brian. First, give us your first question, please, Billy Hearn, if that's okay. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. My question is regarding the table, and it's on page 81 and the bit about antisocial behaviour. It says there, young people who are involved in antisocial behaviour find themselves a focus in small communities, and this leads to difficulty in changing the perception of themselves. Light bulb moment, if you don't want to stand out, don't cause antisocial behaviour in a small community where everybody knows you. If you do, suffer the consequences. But I think it brings out a wider question, because we're talking there about work with young people in rural areas. And as chair of the Community Justice and Safety Partnership, we deal with antisocial behaviour all the time in all different environments. And given this is learning and families, I want to particularly ask a question about antisocial behaviour in schools. I've witnessed awful behaviour towards head teachers and teachers and to other pupils. Myself at the school, after the school, when we was trying to have a meeting afterwards, and the behaviour of the kids to the school itself and to the teachers was not acceptable. So my question is not limiting it to rural areas such as Alyth and what's discussed in the paper, but what can we do more to tackle antisocial behaviour within the school grounds? Because we have other teams that can work in the community and in city centres and towns, but what can we do to specifically target antisocial behaviour within the school during school time and afterwards as well? Thank you.
I think this is a current ongoing discussion that's long-standing and will remain long-standing. I'm not going to ask Aaron or Brian to comment on it because this paper's about the youth strategy. However, I will invite David just to try and, at least to some extent, hospital pass there, but just because it is a valid question. But I'm not going to invite Brian and Aaron to respond to it.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess, you know, there's a bit of a theme, isn't there? And it's about partnership and it's about joint working around about these places. So there's a bit about what happens in school in the classroom, and in terms of, you know, I've been at committee before and we've talked about relationships and behaviour, process and policy that's there, and actually what happens when things go wrong and about the place of consequence when things go wrong as well. I am really clear, and indeed, you know, Scottish Government are really clear, we're really clear as Education and Learning, that when things go wrong in school and pupils make the wrong choice, that a consequence is part of what happens to them, and that consequence can take many shapes and many forms, you know. But the rationale behind that consequence is part of something more holistic to understand what's going on, to try to guide young people towards better choices. And I guess it's the same when we go to look at what happens in communities as well. So we've got, you know, the team that Brian leads and the work that they do in terms of youth work, their articulation with us in education, so that we're all talking to each other as part of that. Sometimes at times in the past in the council we've taken a more locality based approach. We've worked with partners, certainly in Police Scotland, with whom we've got a really positive relationship. And then there's the community, the Council Community Justice, not Community Justice team, sorry, Community Safety team as well, that we work really closely with. So, you know, nobody's going to sit here, I think, and say that antisocial behaviour is something that we condone in our communities. And it is about that kind of articulated, strong response to try to identify early and then, you know, eradicate the root causes of that. But I think what we do have here in Perth and Kinross is we've got a really strong network of partners. I've mentioned some, there's a whole lot of third sector partners that work with us there as well. So that while, you know, unfortunately we will all witness incidents sometimes that happen in or out of school, I think we can have confidence that there is a response to that and that it's an articulated and appropriate one.
Councillor Kigali.
Hi, and this might be an oversensitive one from myself, but I just wanted to assess, I suppose, or ask how confident officers are that the actual voices of young people are being heard. There's just a slight concern I have with some of the language that's used, specifically potentially around the idea that we're promoting young people's voices rather than transmitting them, and that there's a couple of instances where there is, I suppose, potential for funneling and for filtering of young people's views potentially through the youth organisations or other partners, and that we might be getting into a situation where they start reflecting the views of the partners rather than of the young people themselves.
Thanks, Councillor Kigali. I think that's absolutely a fair point, and I think historically we have been guilty of doing that. Actually, I think we've got better the last few months, I think, and not doing that. But I think that's a valid question. I don't know whether Brian, please.
That's a great question. No, I think that the bit is that we want to use the partnership to broker engagement with our youngsters. I'm not wanting our partners to be the voice of youngsters, and the bit about probably that promotion, I would be saying enhancing. You know, it's my bit that we need to be going to where they are, their safe place at their time and in their locality. We can't keep bringing youngsters to the centre during school time, you know, to meeting rooms that they're not familiar with. You know, that will stifle them. I think it's a bit around, we need to be going there, and that offer is there. You know, it's a great question. I am known to tokenistic approaches, if people probably know, and or filtering the voice. And I think that we need to be really going to where they are and meeting the youngsters and hearing what they're saying.
Aaron, please.
Thank you, Convener. It's just to reiterate, we also do have a children's rights worker as well, who has been working really hard, I suppose, over the last year to really gain the voices of young people and bring them into forums where young people themselves don't have the confidence in order to do that. So there are different ways and means in which we are ensuring that transmission of views is happening, but it is something that we're very mindful of, that we're not just kind of making sure that we're providing our views via young people, but young people's voices is being heard.
Thanks, David.
In articulating with this piece is a paper that will come to this committee in 2026, which is Education Learner Participation Policy, and I think that's really important as well. We're aware in education we're always trying to find new ways to engage with the widest possible base of young people, children and young people, including those that might not necessarily put their hands up or their head above the parapet to engage, and that's a constant kind of struggle. I think our schools, it can manage that really well. We've got some really fantastic examples of that out there. I think there's a bit of joint learning for us in an education and learning world, but I think there's also a bit about how we kind of, if you like, gather that collective universal voice, and that will be part of it. I know the discussions have already been going on between my team and Aaron's team about how that can feed into the youth strategy as well, to ensure that there's, if you like, we're not focusing really tightly in specific groups of people. We're gathering that kind of widest voice as possible, which I think is important moving ahead.
Thanks, David. So not oversensitive, as it turns out, Councillor Kigali. Actually, a really good question, and I do take Brian's point as well about we have to go to where youth are, not the other way around. I know that myself and Steve and Michelle have been engaging with our care experienced young people a lot more in the last few months. I was at the Champions Board of the young people in the academy last week. It did take me out of my comfort zone, there's no doubt about that. I'm quite happy to admit that, but nonetheless it was quite enjoyable as well, and definitely worthwhile. Turns out I'm quite good at Jenga, who knew? But I think going to where the young people are is the salient point here. So thank you for the question. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to Brian and the teams for the progress that's been made, some of which we've had presented to Children, Young People and Families Partnership during the year. I look forward to the celebration of the significant volunteering contribution of our young people, and just wondered if you could confirm that it'll consider including the senior pupils that we talked about in the previous report, and also there's volunteering done by third-year pupils across Perth and Kinross as they prepare for the Young Youth youth philanthropy initiative each spring. Certainly those who do well in the competition have committed time and effort to volunteering with their chosen charities, and it would be good if that could be kind of recorded a bit and celebrated as well. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Councillor Barrett. Brian?
I think that's the bit where, you know, you were saying, you know, and the partners realise that as well. You know, I know that through PCAFs they'll get their you know, their awards through PCAFs, you know, the Saltire Awards, through the Duke Edinburgh. I go to presentations to Duke Edinburgh Awards, you know, for youngsters who are volunteering, and we have celebrations there. So our local partners are looking at how do they best support that within local areas. Again, in the old days we used to bring them in here, we want to do that in the locality bit. And a bit about the volunteering, it's just blown me away. You know, you're just saying that about, you know, the group of third year, PCAFs, SHIP. You know, when we bring people together, the bang for the buck, when young people are doing a lot of volunteering, it's a bit about how we put that back and say, thank you very much. So we're looking at that as a partnership approach. There's 39 partners come along, you know, every quarter, you know. So these are some of the targets, you know, about the media, about the celebration, about enhancing voice, you know, about how do we get young people out there to consult with things, you know, around education, big thing around knife crime just now, you know, so we want the voice around that. But right away, police volunteers, I didn't think about that, you know, and it's come out the side, you know, so that's as well, it's trying to capture it now, you know, but great.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Councillor Barrett. Councillor McPherson, please.
Thank you, Convener. My question relates to page 74, specifically 4.1, where it says, unfortunately, despite many attempts to encourage young people to attend, there was little appetite to commit on a regular basis. As somebody who knows well the levels of apathy you can face when you're working with young people, I just wonder if there was any analysis done to develop an understanding of why, in this particular case, young people didn't want to engage. Thank you.
I think you're up again, please. Thank you.
No problem. During the consultation, yep, we had asked youngsters what they wanted, you know, and we went back to like what you would say a traditional youth forum, where we brought youngsters together, and it was on a Sunday at the weekend because you didn't want to interfere with the school. And then analysis came back was, young people are busy, you know, they've got lives as well. And then it was trying to get a consistency. So somebody who was coming along one week couldn't manage the following meeting. So there was a bit of consistency. So they were all happier within their own locality. Right. And then it's the bit around with the learners participation strategy that David was talking about, was how do we then bring a lot of youngsters together in the locality, rather than bringing people from Aberfeldy or Kinross in the winter to Perth and Kinross. And we even tried teams, and you know, and it's sometimes that's intermittent. So it's a bit around how do we do the gatherings consistently in localities, rather than bringing representatives from forums all over Perth and Kinross on a Sunday, you know. Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Councillor McPherson. Last question, I think, from Councillor Stewart, please. Colin Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. It was on a question about the issue about young people needing to know their rights and how to exercise them, and the online information model that's been launched, the UNCRC online information module that's been launched by our children's rights officer. And I just wondered whether members could see what that online information module, what it is, what's in it.
Fine.
Yep. After this, I would like to promote a couple of videos that some of our young people have probably been doing, you know, not just the UNCRC, and about how we're booting that out to promote rights with youngsters and also our partner agencies. But we've just released one around brothers and sisters, you know, try to keep them together, you know, if they're in care. So I would appreciate the opportunity to send that, all the information out, showing what young people have been making and what they're promoting. Yep. No problem there.
Thanks, Brian. What to do, if you don't mind, in practical terms, if you can send it to Andy at Community Services and they'll filter it out.
What I'll do, Andy, as well, is I'll send them the partnership dates as well, and if people want to come along and engage with partners, You know, they're more than welcome. Just make sure that I've got a cup for you.
That'll be really helpful. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Duff has sneaked in with what will be the last question, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much. On page, let's get this right, page 77, there's an entry in the table there about young people needing support to ensure they're safe online and the consequences and impact around their messaging. And, you know, the progress talks about working with partners. I mean, we all know how toxic social media can be, and the need to be aware of the impact of comments that are made online, not just by children. I think there's a lot of adults could take on board that kind of training as well. But I just wondered, it says we're working with operational partners, and I just wondered if you could just give us a wee bit more information about who we're partnering with in relation to try and get this very pertinent issue addressed. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Duff. Brian, please.
Yeah, what's happening at the partnership meeting is that partners will do a bit of presentation on what they could offer, and RASAC did they offer what they were delivering in schools around online safety, and from that being in schools is the RASAC are now delivering it to youth groups in the evening. You know, so we've got that bigger expanse. There are other partner agencies who have put their name forward around health and wellbeing, you know, who are helping some of our partner agencies or partner organisations around health and wellbeing, about mental health first aid. From that as well is that Garnicki invested some money and have organised a health and wellbeing mental health first aid course for our partner agencies. So it's all that that's happening out of this partner collaboration. But RASAC are taking a lead on this. They're the experts, they've got the resources, and it takes pressure off other organisations actually having to go and seek out and actually put programmes together, where I know young people are really doing a good job. So partner organisations, bringing them together is actually giving us, again, a bigger bang for our buck.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for the very good question as well, though. I think social media can be really positive, but there's no doubt there's a negative side to it. And I'm not sure as society we've actually caught up with that negative society yet. I think that's a fair question. Thanks for all your answers there, Brian. Much appreciated. Given the amount of work that Councillor Frampton does in this area, I'm going to ask Michelle to move the report, please.
Thank you. I would like to move the Youth Strategy 2024 annual update that was presented to the Children, Young People and Families Partnership on the 19th of September 2025. The Youth Strategy clearly sets out our commitment to supporting young people across Perth and Kinross. This strategy has been shaped by engagement with youth voices, community partners, service providers, and reflects our shared ambition to create opportunities, improve wellbeing, and ensure that the young people are listened to and valued. As we have heard, the first annual report outlines key priorities, which included access to safe places, targeted support for those facing challenges, and pathways into education, employment, and training. It also highlights the importance of collaboration across departments and with external partners to deliver meaningful outcomes for our young people. This collaboration is evident as youth work providers from across Perth and Kinross come together every 2 months within the Council Civic Hall, providing an opportunity for elected members, council officers and partners to attend and hear directly the views from our young people. It is exciting to see that there are already plans to work alongside the Future Learners Participation Strategy, further strengthening the approach to enhancing the voice of young people. I commend the work that has gone into developing and delivering on this strategy and invite members to support its first annual review and look forward to hearing next year about the work that has been taken forward. I'll ask Councillor Rebick to second.
Thank you, Councillor Frampton. Happy to formally second and invite comments, please. Councillor Watt, please.
I'd like to thank everybody for their work on this report. I'd also like to make special mention to Logos in my ward in Auchterarder and in Crieff, who did a great job engaging with the young people of the area. I'd also like to say, and out here in the sticks, we have a saying that it takes a a village to bring up a child. And with Bailey Ahern's comments, you know, I often interact with children in my area who are doing things they probably shouldn't, and they're always very respectful, and they do see the error in their ways. And I think if more adults treated them on a level playing field, we would certainly see better behaviours from our young people. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, and I think we'll have all have shared similar experiences to both Bailey Ahern and yourself as well. But thank you for those comments. Councillor Duff.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd just like to also thank officers for their work in this particular area, and make note of, in particular, Brian's commitment, enthusiasm towards the work involved. Just reflecting on what Councillor Watt was saying there, I think you know, being a child and transitioning from a child into being an adult is probably a lot harder these days than it was in my day, and I don't envy you know, the children and those who work in that area trying to make sense of half the things that go on these days. But just to say, I welcome the report and thank everybody involved for the work in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. I sometimes wonder whether I'm still in the role of that transformation at 62, but that's another story. Can we agree with the report, please? Thank you. Thanks very much. We will move on to paper 6. The next 3 papers are similar in nature. Thank you, Brian. Thanks very much. The next 3 papers are similar in nature, but I think it is really important, given the bespoke nature of each setting of each school, that we deal with them separately. But David, you're going to introduce the Kinross High School part of this, please.
Yes, and all 3 of these papers reflect our transformation of additional support needs that we're carrying out currently in education and learning. We're joined today by a range of officers in the chamber, including Fiona Mackay and Sarah Stephen, who are the joint authors of the reports. Also Karen Robertson, who's going to help us round about anything about that statutory consultation process, and Eve Moran, who is Quality Improvement Manager of some of these localities as well. So hopefully we should be well covered as we go through. As Convener said, a bit of repetition of introduction, but not the first time, so I'll say it all. The Learning and Families Committee agreed on 29th January 2025 to progress with a statutory consultation and the proposal to establish a permanent intensive support provision, an ISP, at Kinross High. Following completion of that process, officers in education and learning have reviewed the contributions by children, young people, parents, staff, and the Kinross Partnership, and the assessment by Education Scotland. This assessment by Education Scotland involved a visit to the school, review of the responses to the consultation, and meetings with stakeholders by the HMIE inspector. As a result, it was concluded that there was broad support of the proposed development in this area. Therefore, we're now in a position to recommend to the committee that we progress with permanent establishment of the ISP at Kinross High School.
Thanks, David. Questions, please? Councillor Cuthbert. Sorry, it's Bailey Ahern.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my question probably applies to all 3 schools, but I'll ask it in this one. In page 97, paragraph 9.13, it goes on about the ISP will accommodate up to 16 pupils, although it is anticipated a small number will start. I suppose the question, if we look at Perth High School, I asked years before that was built whether we were going to get an ISP in there, and eventually we suddenly decided we need one. But going back to this one in particular, how can we ensure that the facilities we're putting in are going to be sufficient? Because believe me, those 16 places will fill up very quickly and we'll end up with a waiting list. And given the fact that we are retrofitting existing schools to put an ISP in, and you look at the questions that were done on the Viewlands one, how confident are we that we can expand that provision in the future?
Thanks. I think that's a really good question, Bailey Ahern. I'll come to Fiona in a minute. I think you know, the nature of your question is entirely about the raison d'etre for this ISP expansion. Fiona.
So you're right that we can't see, we don't have a crystal ball and we can't see into the future, but we can predict for a relatively good number of years ahead based on the evidence of what we've got coming through. In particular, in this situation, we're talking about a secondary school. So therefore, we know the number of children within our primary schools. We know the number of children that are coming through in our early learning and childcare settings. So we have a better understanding about that. What we, again, is similar to a response I gave earlier, and that we, in addition to looking at this very targeted resource of an intensive support provision, we are also developing our resource and our ability to support children with additional support needs within mainstream settings, so that as far as possible, young people are supported within a mainstream context with support from their support for learning departments within their schools. Therefore, that does enable us to ensure that only those young people who absolutely need an intensive support provision are the ones who are then able to have access to that spaces, ensuring that we've got an element of gatekeeping around the numbers that are there. However, what we would always keep that under review, and as we have seen in other situations in the past, sometimes that needs to expand. It may need to expand only for 1 or 2 years as you become a bulge in terms of numbers, but that we do have the flexibility to take that forward.
Thanks, Fiona. Councillor McPherson, please.
Oh, thank you, convener. It was just some information for my own interest, really, and it relates to the public meetings, not just for Kinross, but I notice also for the following 2 schools, the high school and Viewlands. I note that there was a very small attendance by members of the general public. I think it was 18 in Kinross, 14 for the high school, and 13 for Viewlands. I just wondered how members and parents were notified about the public meeting. I know letters were sent out, but obviously, or were they notified about the public meeting in the letter? And were there any other sort of avenues or ways that parents were notified about the public meeting? Thank you.
Sarah? Karen, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The public meeting dates were initially advertised in public notices in the press. Parents were all given an individual letter which was distributed through the school. The council also published over a period of dates the public meeting dates and the consultation period on social media as well.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Councillor McPherson. I know from the public meetings so far they've been really well attended, which has been good to see. But thanks for your question. Councillor Grant-Stewart, please.
Thank you, convener. I can see from the consultations that there seems to be a favourable response to this. Also, there's some concerns naturally by parents or carers. Am I right in thinking in the previous discussions about the new ISPs, there was some flexibility for children and parents to make a decision about moving to the new facilities?
I think the short answer is yes, but Sarah and or Fiona will maybe give you a little bit more detail about that, please.
Thanks for your question. So in respect to any child or young person who was placed in a provision where they had the opportunity to move closer to their local community, that absolutely was an offer. What we then look at in terms of a locality modelling based approach, when we're considering placement of children coming forward in future years, we would look at where their catchment secondary school would be for the primary context, and again a similar distance for travel in respect to the primary. The real focus driver is keeping children connected to their communities, but of course parents do have the right to consider other alternative provision and would be able to make a placement request for a specific provision if that was something they were looking to do.
Thank you. Councillor Duff.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the consultation. I think in each of the reports it talks about receiving online responses, but that a number of these were invalidated because they didn't have a name or address or an email to validate the response. I'm just wondering, I'm not quite sure how we take these online responses, but normally in an online response, you know, things like name and email address are required. Otherwise, you don't get to submit a response. I just wonder, you know, why are we accepting responses that haven't got the required details?
Karen, please.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. That is a good question, and I agree, and that's something that we are looking at. You're correct that under normal circumstances, if you don't submit that, you can't actually proceed forward. The forum that we had on the council website didn't stop parents, and I think the format of the forum, parents were starting, or respondents were starting to answer, and the name and the email addresses at the end, it is further through the forum. So I think they had started, then got to the bit that said you need to put in your name and address, and they abandoned the forum at that point. So we are looking at that for future consultations around the orders that, you know, we have tried to be accurately reflect what people told us. But part of the reason that we ask for the name and address is that we then have a legal requirement to go back to everyone who submitted a response to the council when we publish the consultation report, and we can't do that to these people regardless of what they've told us. But we have reflected that we did get these responses, but we couldn't make any further contact with them. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Councillor Duff. I think in moving the report, I think Councillor Duff, you and
I didn't want to pop that in until I saw there was other questions. Yeah, it's about the financial side of all of this. I'm not sure if we should get some financial information at this or where we had it previously when we agreed the consultations, if you like. But I just wonder if there is any information about the overall financial consequences for the council about bringing in ISPs. I know that it will save us some money in terms of travel and things like that, but presumably it will also cost us additional money in relation to other aspects of it. And I think at 9.11, I think it does talk about there has been some support this year with additional Scottish Government funding. But I just wondered if there was anything that could be said about the financial implications for the council of ISPs. Thank you.
thank you. I think that's a fair question. You're right to allude to him. I think it was £700,000 was our share of the Scottish Government's money that was, you know, for additional supported in the budget. And I do think there might be savings to some degree on transport, but this isn't, we're not doing this to save money. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do. But in terms of a broader financial implication, David, I think you want to say something, please. Thank you.
So yeah, absolutely, and it's important to state right now that this is a transformative piece of work in terms of meeting the needs of children and young people in Perth and Kinross. That transformation is about how we meet their needs rather than about necessarily saving money. So the transport savings are there, but they're not going to be out, you know, they're not going to outweigh the additional cost that might come through this. We're really grateful for the additionality in funding from Scottish Government, and that's really helped us with this project, but there will be a financial cost for us as an organisation, as there is with any kind of allocation of funding. Part of that will be about capital, you know, and there was a question earlier on about the retrofit required to schools as well, to make sure that we get the right environment for our learners. So there's a capital element to that, and we have to look at the totality of our capital budget as well, and how we kind of slot this in with the kind of various competing needs that are there. And that's a really important thing to do. But the capital budget is a bit like revenue budget as well. There's a bit about, you know, as time goes on and there's an evolution of the needs that are in front of you. It's about resource movement and resource allocation to meet those needs. And I suppose ultimately that's one of my jobs. So I won't be coming to council to look for more money to fund this. But what we will do is we'll look at the totality of the education and learning budget, and we'll make sure that the correct amount of funding is put in to meet all the needs that we have. So in terms of additional support needs, intensive is really the sharp end of that, but we've got to ensure that we're able to support enhanced need that sits in the mainstream environment or below that additional need, or indeed the universal piece as well, together with support and care experience, etc., etc. So for me, it's really a question about resource management across the whole piece of education and learning, which is a big environment. We have over 3,000 employees, for example. So that's a lot of jigsaw to move around, but if we believe this is a real need and priority, then it is a real need and priority. So we need to kind of make sure that we're able to meet that from within that budget envelope.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Duff. I think, because I know Councillor Carr wants to make some comment and seconding as well, but I think with your permission, Steve, we'll make the comments after the last paper. And at this point, just formally move paper 6. If you can formally second it, Councillor Carr, that'd be appreciated. And we'll make the comments in the paper 8. Thank Councillor Cuthbert for a comment, please.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the ISP at Kinross, just to say, delighted to see this coming. It's been needed for a long time. There's not been an ISP south of Perth, so it's filling a gap that's needed. The other thing is that I'm looking forward to hearing about the primary school ISP in Kinross-shire, because there isn't one. And we have kids who are being transported, I believe, as far as Errol to go to primary school. So I look forward to that coming to committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cuthbert. You're spot on there with your comments. If there are no further particular comments on the Kinross High School consultation report, can we agree paper 6? Thank you very much. And we'll move on to paper 7, which I can't find, so I'll just ask David to introduce it, please. Thank you.
Thanks. I think it's Perth High. Thank you. Just double checking out what papers in order. So, it's very similar. It's part of the same process. Learning Families Committee agreed on the 29th of January to progress with the statutory consultation and the proposal to establish a permanent ISP at Perth High School. And that process was the same process that we undertook in terms of the Kinross High School ISP as well. Overall, the views were supportive of the proposed development. Therefore, we're now in a position to recommend to the committee that we progress with permanent establishment of the ISP at Perth High School.
Thank you, David. Any questions on the Perth High School aspect of? Councillor Barrett, please.
Thank you, Convener. As you know, I welcome the proposed ISP at Perth High School, not just to help the supported pupils and their families by providing the schooling closer to home, but also in terms of the opportunities for staff and the strengthening of ties within our communities by keeping children together and as close as possible to home. I welcome the broad support for this shown through the consultations and our responses, and I see there's the commitment to a short life working group, including the Parent Council, to monitor the impacts of the new ISP and identify any material changes that may be needed. Has that been set up, or what's the timescale for that, please, David?
So that proposal went to the chair of the Parent Council at Perth High to share with the Parent Council membership. I'm trying to remember dates. I think it was since the move to the new school. So that was agreed by the Parent Council chair. So yes, it's ongoing for this year. I don't have a date for the first meeting at this stage, but it has been accepted.
Thanks, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Duff.
Thanks. At 9.2 in this report, it talks about the ISP will be placed with the original design for the school had the support for learning department. I'm not quite sure what that does specifically, but is it being relocated elsewhere in the school, or is it being done away with instead of the ISP?
No, it's been relocated within the school. So I suppose support for learning department is really where we meet those additional and enhanced needs for young people. So that's young people who would always have attended a mainstream school, but particularly need a bit of extra support. So part of their learning might be delivered within that physical space, or it may well be that the experts that work in that space occupy them in their mainstream learning, so that still continues. You know, and part of our engagement with the parent council at Perth High was round about that retrofit part, if you like, which I think will probably be a feature of all three of these, about the kind of suitability of space. So when we moved the ISP into the area that was originally designated for the learning support department, we then had to move other spaces around the school to ensure that both they found a suitable environment, and then the area that they were displacing, which I think was the school library, found a suitable environment as well. And I think that's part of the monitoring that's ongoing as part of the Short Life Working Group that Councillor Barrett mentioned.
Thanks, Councillor Duff. Thank you, David. Again, at this point, if there are no more questions, I'll just formally move the report and ask Councillor Carr to formally second, please. Thank you.
Happy second.
Thank you. Any comments on the Perth High School aspect of our intensive support provision expansion? Or can we agree with the report? Thank you very much. I come to paper 8, which is Viewlands Primary School ISP statutory consultation, and David, please introduce this one as well. Thank you.
Many thanks, Convener. I will try to remember to switch my microphone off this time. I'm having a bit of a bad day for it. So again, the Learning Families Committee agreed on 29th January to progress with a statutory consultation and the proposal to establish a permanent ISP at Viewlands Primary School. Following completion of that process, officers in education and learning have reviewed the contributions by children, staff and parents, including a meeting with the Parent Council. At this school, some parents raised concerns that the introduction of the ISP may impact on the availability of space for the children who attend mainstream classes in the school. However, officers from Education and Learning have worked with wider council services to ensure any concerns are addressed and will remain available to parents to work collaboratively to address any remaining concerns throughout the implementation stages. Again, Education Scotland undertook an assessment of the proposal for this school, which included review of the responses to the consultation, visits to the school and meetings with stakeholder groups. Overall, although there were things identified that required to be addressed, significant progress was made in doing so over the summer break. In summary, the views gathered were broadly supportive of the proposed development. Therefore, we're now in a position to recommend to the committee that we progress with permanent establishment of the ISP at Viewlands Primary School.
Thank you, David. Questions, please? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener. Viewlands Primary is in my ward, so it is very close to my heart. I've been contacted this morning by a parent, GP and member of the Parent Council who has raised again their concerns about the adequacy of the toilets at Viewlands Primary School. This was raised in the responses to the consultation. I know there was work done over the summer, but there do appear to still be issues with the disrepair and cleanliness of the existing toilets. There are children who are refusing to use the toilets, which is obviously unhealthy for a large variety of reasons. Could you tell us what's being done about that, those concerns? Thank you.
Fiona, please.
So yes, it was raised during Parent Council meeting that we attended as part of the ISP consultation. Although it's not connected to the ISP, I think it's important to say that one of the pieces of work that the Property Service undertook during the summer holidays was to install an accessible toilet, which is situated beside the ISP. So that has helped in terms of alleviate some of the pressures on toilets within Viewlands. But I think the issues that have been raised by the parent are more related to the existing mainstream toilets, which the head teacher has also been made aware of. And he has taken forward already discussions with Tayside Contracts because some of the issues relate to the support that is provided to the school by Tayside Contracts in respect of cleaning. And my understanding is that he's progressing some of the concerns through that route.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Councillor Barrett.
Could I please ask if could I have a response from the head teacher that I can pass on to my constituent? Thank you.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. We'll go to Councillor Duff now, please, but I will come back to you, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. I'm interested in how we've dealt with the one written representation that purportedly represents the views of 61 parents who have objected to the proposal. Within the sort of statistical tables in the paper, it's just treated as one response, if you like. But obviously it's quite concerning, I suppose, that 61 parents presumably have individually put their name to that letter or response in some kind of way. I'm just interested in, what level of concern are we treating that response with, and what have we done to respond to the concerns of these 61 parents, and have they modified their concerns in any way since submitting this? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Duff. I know that we had a letter from 61 parents, which is where this comes from, with very specific concerns. I think we have responded to that in detail, but I'll maybe ask Fiona just to confirm that, please.
Yes, so I think there is a requirement for ongoing dialogue with parents within Viewlands Primary School, and we recognise that. And in the same way as we've talked about having an ongoing working group with Perth High School, we would be looking to have ongoing support contact with Viewlands Primary School. That will involve attending their parent council meeting, which there was to be one for tonight, but that's been postponed now to later in the month. So we'll pick that up when it comes. Since that's probably been the first opportunity to come together with them since we published the report, which was published for 3 weeks, Karen, on the Perth and Kinross website, which drew together all of the consultation, because I think although it was a letter from 61 parents, those parents didn't choose to engage with us in terms of the parent council meeting that we attended. Sarah and I attended prior to the closing of the consultation, or come to the open meeting, which was made available to them as well. So although there's a number of concerns there, we felt that they've been able to be addressed and picked up as part of the work that is ongoing to support the school, both in terms of the adaptation of spaces that we're using, the phasing of work that's been undertaken to make sure that we progress to the ISP, to the position that's able to have the 2 classes, and to ensure that there's good playground space, because playground space is one of their biggest concerns. So the school have already had an ongoing project with parents around looking at the development of their playground, and that was already in traction before we began the work around the ISPs. So we're able to bring the 2 pieces of work together to look at it jointly, as looking at how we enhance that environment. But I think that the dialogue with parents will very much be an ongoing arrangement. I think it's important to say as well that those parents didn't choose to come back and add anything when we published the report, bringing together the findings of the consultation. So I think that there is a general reassurance, and from our understanding from contact with both the head teacher and the staff within the school, that there hasn't been any issues raised since that period.
Mr. Duff.
Just to be followed, just for confirmation then, so when the report was published, each of the people who we'd had responses from would have been notified that that report had been published. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor Duff. Obviously, the letter that was received with the other parent signatures on it, they were the person that were contacted to be made aware that the report was then published and available for sharing with the rest of the parents that they represented in the letter. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Councillor Duff. I think it's important to say as well that as these conversations are ongoing, that we will make sure that local elected members, not least Councillor McPherson and Councillor Barrett, who sit in this committee, will be involved in all those discussions. Councillor Colin Stewart, please.
Thanks, convener. It's not a question specifically about this, but it arises out of this and the last paper. A general question moving forward. I know, for example, that our new school builds are moving away from an open plan model in response to additional support needs. I just wondered whether any further new school builds, given that the concern that's highlighted in this and the last paper about it not being incorporated, an ISP not being incorporated as part of the design and build, whether that's being considered for future school build.
Thank you. I'll admire your optimism about future school builds in the current financial climate, but I'll ask David to respond, please.
And the answer to that is yes. And I suppose, you know, that there's a bigger nuanced discussion here, isn't there, you know, about lead time and build and whatnot, you know. So, for example, the lead time before the opening of Perth High was long, and it was extra long because of COVID, etc., etc. And sometimes the needs that we face change over time, and sometimes the way that we address those needs change over time. I think you've already identified some of the challenges that we have across our school estate, whereby, you know, the current educational thinking was applied and there were unintended consequences around that, and you've talked about open plan and ASN. So there's the thing about, you know, looking at these things carefully and in a proportionate way as well, you know. So I think the idea of, you know, when you do plan new build, about flexibility to adapt to changing needs that comes is probably one of the more important things that happens. So yes, it is really important that we gather voices of the community, including the school management at that time, including the wider stakeholders. It's really important that people like myself and my team have a view in that. But it's also really important that we understand that we're designing for the next 50 to 100 years, which none of us are completely aware of what the need will be at that stage. So that flexibility piece is really important for me, so that we don't get down blind alleys, perhaps, that we then find really difficult to kind of retrofit our way back out of.
Thanks, Councillor Stewart. Thanks, David. Councillor Barrett, I think you had a second question, please.
Thank you. I think it has partly at least been answered by Fiona Mackay. It was about just highlighting that the Inspector of Education had pointed up the need for the improved communication with parents and staff, and that we have committed to the continuing to work with stakeholders, and that we as a committee are being asked to endorse those arrangements. So I understand it's going to be regular attendance at parent council meetings going forward, and other things around that. Is that right?
Thank you. Communication's key. I'm really confident that our officers will do that in an appropriate fashion. But Sarah, do you want to give some detail? Thank you.
So we're looking at a range of forums to ensure that the stakeholders are engaged. So far we have met with staff. I have already had 3 support practice visits, so I'll be continuing to do that for the duration of the implementation of phase 1 and 2 before I go to my normal quality improvement visits. I've met with all of the families from the ISP, and I've got another date scheduled in January, so they're part and parcel of what phase 2 will look like, and we'll also include the wider parent group as well to ensure that there's voices there alongside children as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. There are no more questions, I don't think, so I will formally move this with a comment, which probably largely applies to the last 3 papers. If there's a little bit of repetition between David McCluskey's introduction and my moving and Councillor Carr's seconding, I'm not sure. I apologise for that. I think it's really what we're saying is really important, and it's worth repetition if it turns out to be the case. The expansion of our intensive support provision is necessary and exciting at the same time. I think this largely brings phase 1 to completion, but phase 2 and phase 3 will be equally important as we move into that with St John's and Auchterarder next. I think the Kinross Shire, I say that deliberately rather than just saying Kinross, but the Kinross Shire Primary School is really important. It is more difficult slightly because I think it will need a little bit of capital investment and it needs a little bit more work, but that is not an excuse for not doing it as quickly as we are able to do so. We need to do that because, as you rightly point out, there is a gap there which needs filled, and I think that's important. This is a good thing to do. It is important that we keep our young people, particularly those who have a high level of need, in their communities, with friends, with siblings, with family, and with their peers, allowing them a more comfortable educational experience, and one where appropriate, meaning that mainstreaming becomes a little bit easier. There has been some really good discussion at the public meetings, challenging sometimes, but very helpful, and the engagement of parents and other stakeholders has been worthwhile and appreciated, and it's necessary to keep that ongoing. I have to say two things about them. Our officers were excellent at these, genuinely excellent at these public consultations. They took everything that was said really seriously and responded, which was good to know. The impression I got from public across the three consultations was that they're supportive of this, as long as it doesn't interfere with the current arrangements of the school, which isn't an entirely fair point to make if you're a parent or a carer. I'm confident that we'll be able to do this expansion without detriment to the normal activities of the school, and that's important. But also appreciated is the engagement, discussion, and indeed the support, by and large, from elected members right across this chamber, which has made the progress of intensive support provision expansion as smooth as possible. It is appreciated, and I'm really pleased to move this paper. Councillor Carr.
Thank you. Intensive support provision allows us to keep our young people within the communities and the school environments where they have built up positive relationships. Maintaining these positive relationships are so important as they move through the educational system, and this ISP expansion will allow us to do that. ISPs will also provide a positive educational experience for our young people, and not only provide support for our young people, but also allows us as an authority to provide an appropriate level of mainstream education where it is most needed. I know that within my ward, the news of the intensive support provision schedule for the Community School of Auchterarder has been very warmly welcomed. I'm happy to second this paper.
Thanks, Councillor Carr. Comments first from Baillie Ahern and then Councillor Barrett, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. It's no secret that additional support needs is really close to my heart, and I really welcome these papers introducing ISPs into 3 more of our schools. As has been said, this is part of an ongoing programme to retrofit schools with an ISP revision and not before time. Eventually, we will have a PKC-wide through school provision from primary to secondary in all our schools, and it is important these provisions are alongside mainstream schooling. There is a place for independent provision, but these new provisions in the mainstream environment is widely needed. I hope we've learned from the lessons in retrofitting that when designing a new school, Bertha Park Primary, we have plans for an ISP in the design. Riverside Primary School is an example of where we really get this right. Thank you.
Well said, Baillie Ahern. Councillor Barrett, please.
Thank you, Convener. I just want to say I also welcome the proposed ISPs in these schools, especially in Perth High School and Fewlands Primary. I'd like to thank everyone in the community who engaged constructively with the consultation process, and to all the officers who are helping to make this work. And we look forward to receiving updates at this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. If there are no more comments, can we agree the paper? Thank you very much. We'll move on to the last paper of the day, I think, without a break, given that it's the last paper, which is the statutory consultation on the COPEC closure, and David will introduce it, please.
Thank you, Convener. Before I do introduce, I just want to thank Karen Robertson for her work. That's 4 statutory consultations we brought to committee today. So it's a good example of intra-council working, because Karen's not actually part of education and learning team. She works for finance and business services, and she's been a crucial part of the work that's happened. And we're also joined today by Eve Moran, who's taken on the early years portfolio since she's moved into education and learning. But obviously, this has been quite a long story, and it's one that's pre-existed myself as well. So I might spare Eve too many searching questions and try and field them myself. Formal consultation took place in May 2025 to formally close the former site of City of Perth Early Childhood Centre at McCallum Co-op and formalise delivery at Goodley Burn Primary School, where the service has been successfully delivering high quality early learning and childcare for the past 4 to 5 years. The consultation report includes minutes of the meetings, a report of the findings, a report from a representative from Education Scotland and the Council's responses to the questions and comments received through consultation. The report evidences that there was no public pushback to the proposal and children and families are highly satisfied with delivery of early learning and childcare from Goodleyburn Primary School. As a former building has been demolished and the site is at continued risk of flooding, there is no barrier to closing the former site. And indeed, there's a significant barrier to not closing it, let's be honest. The report contains feedback from staff who did not feel supported during the flooding incident, though, and the subsequent move to the setting, first to Perth Grammar Wing and then to Goodleyburn Primary School. This feedback is valuable in considering future approaches for dealing with critical incidents, and I would want to assure the committee and indeed the staff of COPEC that those lessons have been taken on board and learned. As a result of concerns about the environment within the nursery spaces at Goodleyburn Primary School, particularly around free flow access to the outdoors, the proposal has undergone a small edit for approval at this committee. And the addition to this proposal is it will continue to engage with stakeholders and options to address the issues raised in regard to the environment at the current site will be discussed, explored and ameliorated. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Questions, please? If there are none, I will briefly make comment and move in the report. I know that COPEC is really important to the residents of Perth City North. I'm delighted that it's back here after its temporary replacement in the grammar school. There will be ongoing work in Goodleyburn just to make sure that it's as good as it could be, and that's quite appropriate, but we're delighted to have it back. Given that the original building's not there, it does feel a fairly easy paper to move, and I will ask Councillor Carter formally second it, please.
Happy to second the paper.
Thank you very much. Comment from Councillor Barrett, please.
Just to say I welcome this too, and also the concerns raised about the layout at Goodleyburn are being listened to, and we do look forward to having an update on the outcome of the ongoing consultation with stakeholders and the options to address things. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Duff.
Yes, thank you. Also welcome the report and also welcome the comments by Mr McCluskey about the lessons to be learned around this particular move, and also the bit in the recommendations that will continue to work with the stakeholders and the options available in terms of delivering the early childhood centre. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Duff. Can we agree with the report? Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much.